The bookworm thought she was meeting a struggling student on a blind date, but what she discovered would turn her quiet life upside down. Before we begin this story, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. She thought she was meeting a struggling student. Just another quiet evening in a cafe. A blind date set up by her best friend. Nothing extraordinary. But that night was the beginning of a story Evelina Hart could never have imagined. Evelina was a quiet bookworm, her golden hair often falling across her round reading glasses. She spent more time with her novels than in crowded rooms. She wasn't searching for wealth or chasing glamour. All she wanted was a genuine connection. And across from her, she believed, would be a man living a simple life, a student who was kind, someone who needed patience, someone perhaps just as lonely as she was. What Evelina didn't know was that the man waiting for her was no ordinary student. Adrian Cole, tall and confident, with piercing green eyes and disarming smile, carried a secret far larger than she could have imagined. Because behind the modest words and warm laughter, Adrian was hiding a fortune. He was a billionaire disguised as a man with nothing. Imagine believing you found someone who truly sees you, only to discover their entire story was built on a lie. This is the story of Evelina, the bookworm who thought she was meeting a struggling student, and Adrian, the billionaire who longed to be loved for more than money. A story of secrets, heartbreak, and a love tested by truth. And it all begins with a single blind date. Evelina Hart lived in a world made of paper and ink, while others filled their evenings with parties, crowded restaurants, and the endless hum of social chatter. Evelina chose a quiet company of books. Her small apartment, tucked away on a sleepy street, was a sanctuary lined with shelves that bowed under the weight of well-loved novels. Their spines worn, their pages annotated with soft pencil marks. Each one was a trusted companion. She was gentle in her movements, careful as if the world around her might break if touched too suddenly. Her golden blonde hair often slipped from behind her ear and fell against the rim of her round glasses, and more often than not, she'd be too absorbed in a story to notice. Her blue eyes, shy and searching, seemed to shine brightest when they were cast down upon a page. For Evelina, books weren't an escape from life. They were life. The love she couldn't find in the real world. She found in timeless romances. The courage she sometimes lacked, she borrowed from heroines who defied kingdoms and fate. And though she longed for connection, she was content to love quietly, to watch the world through windows rather than stand at its center. Her friends often teased her for being too reserved, too careful, too lost in her own little world. But Evelina had always been that way. Social gatherings left her uneasy. Small talk felt like a foreign language. And yet, despite her quiet nature, there was a depth to her kindness that those who truly knew her treasured. She listened with patience. She spoke with sincerity. She noticed things others overlooked. It was this quiet warmth that made her best friend insist on setting her up. "You spend enough evenings alone with books," her friend had laughed. "It's time you let someone write a new chapter with you." Evelina resisted at first. She had no interest in blind dates, no desire to sit across from a stranger, fumbling through awkward questions. But her friend was persistent, and in the end, Evelina agreed, more to appease and out of hope. She was told he was a struggling student, someone humble, someone who could use a person like her, patient, gentle, steady. Evelina imagined what he might be like, a young man tired from long nights of study, perhaps carrying the weight of worries she could help ease. She pictured someone ordinary, someone who, like her, was simply trying to find their place in a noisy world. Still, as the day of the meeting drew closer, Evelina's heart stirred with something she rarely allowed herself to feel: nervous anticipation. She caught herself glancing at her reflection in the mirror longer than usual, brushing her hair with more care, wondering if he would notice the way she sometimes pushed her glasses up when she grew nervous. It was unlike her to hope, unlike her to imagine a connection outside the pages of her novels. Yet, as she stepped out of her quiet apartment that evening, book tucked under her arm for comfort, she couldn't help but wonder if this blind date might become something more than a fleeting conversation. And though Evelina had no way of knowing it, her life, so steady, so ordinary, so beautifully book-bound, was about to be rewritten. Evelina arrived at the cafe with her usual careful steps, clutching the strap of her bag a little too tightly. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roasted coffee beans drifting from the doorway. She paused outside, her breath catching, her glasses sliding slightly down her nose as nerves began to whisper their doubts. What if he didn't like her? What if she had nothing interesting to say? Still, she pushed the door open. A warm bell chimed overhead, and a familiar comfort of soft music and the low murmur of voices wrapped around her. The cafe was cozy, with shelves of books tucked between tables and little lamps casting golden pools of light. It felt like a place made for her, and perhaps that was why her friend had chosen it. Her eyes scanned the room. For a moment, she didn't know who she was looking for. Then she saw him, Adrian. He was sitting near the window, the fading evening light brushing against his face. Tall, broad-shouldered, with warm brown hair that caught the glow of the lamps, and piercing green eyes that lifted the moment she walked in. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, yet his smile, when it spread across his lips, was gentle, inviting, almost disarming. Evelina felt her stomach flutter, a sensation both exciting and terrifying. She adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit she could never quite control, and walked toward him. Evelina? His voice was smooth, touched with warmth, as though her name was something precious. She nodded, her cheeks warming. Yes, Adrian. He rose slightly, offering a polite handshake, though his eyes lingered on hers in a way that made her heart stumble. Once they sat, Evelina found herself fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve, unsure of how to begin. But Adrian didn't rush her. He leaned in just enough to show he was listening, his presence steady and patient. They began with small talk, though it quickly grew into something more. Evelina, shy at first, found herself speaking about the novel she loved. The way stories transported her to worlds where courage and love always prevailed. As she spoke, her blue eyes lit up with a sparkle that Adrian couldn't look away from. Every time she pushed her glasses up her nose and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, he smiled, as if memorizing the gesture. Adrian shared bits of himself, too. He spoke modestly, as though his life was simple, ordinary. He told her about his supposed classes, about long nights studying, about dreams of the future. His words were carefully chosen, each one meant to paint a picture of someone humble, someone struggling, someone like the man she had been told he was. And Evelina believed him. Why wouldn't she? His kindness felt genuine, his laughter warm. When she confessed how awkward she often felt in social settings, he chuckled softly and said, "That's not awkward, that's endearing." Her cheeks flushed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. The evening stretched on. Coffee cups emptied, yet neither wanted to leave. Their conversation moved effortlessly from books to childhood memories, to little dreams tucked away in quiet corners of their hearts. Every time Evelina laughed, Adrian leaned closer, as if her laughter was something rare and fragile he wanted to hold on to. By the time they stepped out into the night, the air cool and crisp, Evelina realized her nerves had melted into something else entirely. Hope. She had come expecting nothing more than an awkward meeting, a polite exchange before retreating back into her world of novels. Instead, she found herself walking beside a man who made her heart beat in unfamiliar rhythms. Adrian, watching her under the glow of the street lamps, felt something stir within him too. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected her sincerity, Her unpolished honesty, the way she looked at him as though she were more interested in his words than in appearances. For a man used to masks and expectations, it was disarming. It was dangerous. Neither of them said it out loud, but both of them felt it. This was not the kind of evening that ended at the cafe door. It was the start of something neither of them had dared to imagine. And as they parted with shy smiles and the unspoken promise of seeing each other again, Evelina's quiet world began to shift, unaware of the secret that shadowed every step Adrian took. Evelina hadn't expected the second meeting to come so soon. Yet, only a few days after their first encounter, her phone lit up with a message from Adrian. Simple, thoughtful, and free of pretense. Would you like to meet again? Maybe a walk this time. Her heart gave a little leap, and before she could talk herself out of it, she agreed. That evening, they strolled to the park as twilight settled over the trees. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and distant lilacs, and Evelina clutched a worn paperback in her hand, as though carrying apart her world with her. Adrian noticed, of course, and teased gently, "You even bring books on walks." She laughed, embarrassed, but he shook his head with a smile. "Don't ever stop. That's what makes you you." Moments like these began to weave themselves into something more. Coffee at the cafe turned into afternoons at the library, where Adrian would pretend to read while secretly watching her lose herself in pages. Sometimes, when Evelina looked up suddenly, their eyes met, and she would flush, push her glasses up nervously, while Adrian only smiled as if her smallest habits were treasures. They discovered a rhythm together. Evelina shared her favorite novels, explaining in quiet, excited tones why a character mattered to her or why a passage stayed etched in her heart. Adrian listened with a focus that startled her. Most people brushed off her bookish passions, but he leaned in as though every word she spoke revealed a secret worth keeping. Adrian, in turn, told her pieces of his story, bits about his so-called classes, the long hours he claimed to spend studying, the odd jobs he said he'd taken to make ends meet. His words painted the image of a man carrying burdens but unwilling to complain. Evelina admired that. She saw resilience, determination, and she felt safe with him. Safe in a way that made her think of those rare characters in novels who saw not just the surface, but the soul. Yet, even as their bond deepened, little threads of doubt began to tug at Evelina's heart. She tried not to notice at first. The expensive-looking watch glinting on his wrist, the way he never hesitated when paying for meals, the subtle ease with which he spoke about experiences that didn't quite align with a struggling student's life. She brushed it away, convincing herself she was imagining things. He was kind. He was present. He made her feel alive in ways she had never felt before. Surely that mattered more than a few small details. Still, late at night, as she curled up with her books, Evelina's thoughts returned to those inconsistencies. Could she really trust him? Or was she simply blinded by the warmth he made her feel? Adrian wrestled with his own storm. Every time he looked at Evelina, he felt a fragile sense of peace, a kind of love untainted by money or fame. And every time he opened his mouth, intending to confess the truth, he faltered. Her trust was too precious, her smile too fragile. What if revealing his secret shattered everything they had begun to build? And so, their story continued. Days blending into weeks, their connection blooming like spring flowers, fragile yet full of promise. But beneath that beauty lay a shadow, an unspoken truth hovering between them, waiting for the moment when it could no longer be ignored. For Evelina, this was the first time she allowed herself to believe in love outside the pages of her books. For Adrian, it was the first time he longed to be seen as nothing more than himself. Together, they walked a path both tender and uncertain, unaware of how quickly that path was leading them toward heartbreak and revelation. Adrian Cole had lived much of his life in the spotlight, though not by choice. His name appeared in headlines, his face on magazine covers, his fortune discussed in hushed voices behind boardroom doors. From a distance, it looked enviable, a young billionaire shaping the future, commanding respect, carrying power most people could only dream of. But wealth, he had learned, was a lonely kind of prison. Every handshake, every smile, every whispered compliment always came with expectation. People didn't look at Adrian and see a man. They saw money. They saw influence. They saw a life they wanted a piece of. And behind the charm he wore so effortlessly, Adrian carried a deep, unshakable fear that no one would ever love him for himself. When he first agreed to that blind date, he hadn't planned to lie. He had simply wanted a moment of normalcy, to meet someone who didn't see him as a headline, to be judged not by his wealth, but by his words. So he let the story of being a struggling student slip from his lips, and in Evelina's eyes, he found exactly what he had been starving for: sincerity. She looked at him without calculation. She listened as though his thoughts, not his bank account, mattered. She smiled at his jokes without knowing who he was. And with every passing day, the lie grew heavier. He watched Evelina's blue eyes light up when she spoke about her favorite books. He watched the way she hugged them to her chest, as though they were treasures no one else could understand. He memorized the way she brushed her golden hair behind her ear when she grew nervous, the way she bit her lip when she was about to say something vulnerable. These details, so small and ordinary, were more valuable to him than all the millions in his bank account. Yet, even in the sweetness of those moments, guilt gnawed at him. He saw the trust in her eyes, and it burned. He heard the softness in her voice, and it ached. Each time she spoke about honesty, about the importance of truth in stories and in people, he felt a blade twist deeper inside him. Adrian tried to justify it. He told himself he needed more time, that if he revealed the truth too soon, she might run before she had the chance to know him, that he wasn't lying out of malice, but out of desperation, to hold on to the only thing that felt real in his life. But the justifications rang hollow in quiet hours of the night. There were moments when he nearly confessed, when Evelina laughed so freely that he almost blurted out the truth, ready to lay himself bare. When she told him how much she valued honesty, he nearly dropped the facade and begged her to see him, the real him. But then he would look into her trusting eyes, fragile and bright, and the words would die on his tongue. For Adrian, the lie had become both a shield and a chain. It protected him from the rejection he feared most, but it bound him with the weight of betrayal he knew was inevitable. Every gesture of kindness from Evelina only deepened the wound. Every smile she gave him, every time she leaned into his presence with quiet trust, reminded him of the storm that was coming, because he knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. And when it came to light, it would not only test their fragile bond, it might destroy it entirely. Adrian had everything money could buy, but Evelina's love, her quiet devotion, her unshakable sincerity, that was the one thing he could lose with a single breath. And so, each day he lived in two worlds. The world Evelina believed, the simple student struggling to make ends meet, and the world of Adrian Cole, billionaire, a man whose fortune could buy anything but the peace of being truly known. And in the quiet corners of his heart, he feared the inevitable truth that when Evelina finally discovered who he really was, her trust would crumble, and the girl who made him feel human again would walk away forever. It was an ordinary afternoon when Evelina decided to stop by her favorite bookstore. The sky outside was gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and she slipped inside with a sigh of relief, greeted by the comforting scent of paper and ink. She moved through the aisles the way she always did, carefully, reverently, running her fingers along the spines of novels, stacking a small pile in her arms. Books were her constant companions, her safest place, the one world where everything felt steady. But that afternoon, her steady world shattered. Balancing her books, she turned a corner and froze. Her eyes landed on a glossy magazine displayed on a stand by the register. She almost didn't notice it at first, but then the face staring back at her made her breath catch in her throat. Adrian. There he was, smiling confidently from the cover, his piercing green eyes just as she knew them, his name printed in bold letters, and beneath it, a headline that made her knees weaken. Adrian Cole, the young billionaire shaping the future. Her arms trembled. The stack of books nearly slipped from her grasp. For a moment, the world around her blurred, voices muffled, the sound of rain tapping against the glass drowned out by the pounding of her heart. Adrian Cole, not the struggling student she thought she knew, not the man fumbling through late-night study sessions, the one scraping by with part-time jobs. A billionaire, a man who had sat across from her, looked into her trusting eyes and let her believe a lie. Evelina's glasses fogged as her eyes filled with tears. She whispered the words aloud, as though saying them could make sense of betrayal. So it was all a lie. Shoppers move around her, unaware of the storm breaking inside her chest. She clutched her books to her chest like armor, but they could not protect her from the sting of deception. Every memory, every smile, every shared secret, every walk in the park, suddenly twisted into something she couldn't recognize. Had he ever been real with her? Or had it all been a performance? The headline screamed truths she had never been trusted with. The photograph showed a man she had never met, surrounded by wealth and power. And yet, it was the same man who had held her hand, who had listened to her ramble about novels, who had made her feel seen for the first time in her life. That contradiction tore at her. Betrayal and heartbreak war with a part of her that still, even now, longed for him. But the wound cut too deep. The Adrian she thought she loved had never truly existed. Rain began to fall harder outside, streaking the windows of the bookstore. Evelina blinked through her tears, her vision hazy, her chest heavy with the weight of disappointment. She turned from the magazine, clutching her books so tightly her knuckles whitened. In that moment, surrounded by stories she had always trusted, Evelina felt the cruel irony. The man who had made her believe in a love story outside the pages had built it on lies. And unlike the novel she cherished, this chapter wasn't filled with happy endings. It was filled with heartbreak. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her. And as she stepped out of the bookstore, raindrops mingling with her tears, she knew that the truth had found her, and it had left her heart in pieces. Evelina sat at the library desk that night, surrounded by towers of books waiting to be cataloged. Normally, this was her refuge. The quiet rustle of pages, the faint scent of old paper, the steady rhythm of order in a chaotic world. But tonight, none of it brought her peace. Her hands trembled as she straightened stacks that didn't need straightening. Her glasses slipped down her nose, and she didn't bother to push them up. Her mind was too heavy, her heart too raw. The image from the magazine would not leave her. Adrian's face smiling back at her, paired with the truth she was never meant to discover. A billionaire, a man who would let her believe in a carefully spun story. Every laugh, every look, every moment of tenderness replayed now with the sting of betrayal. She pressed her books tighter to her chest, as if they could shield her from the memory. Then she heard it, the faint creak of the library door opening against the weight of the storm outside. Her breath caught. She knew before she looked up. Adrian. He stepped into the glow of the library lamps, soaked from the rain. Water dripped from his hair, his shirt clinging to his broad frame, his usual confident posture broken. For the first time since she met him, he looked small, vulnerable. Evelina. His voice cracked as he spoke her name, rough and trembling, as though he'd been searching for her through the storm. She turned her gaze back to the books, refusing to meet his eyes. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was quiet but sharp, every word laced with hurt. Adrian stepped closer, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. I had to find you. I had to explain. She cut him off, clutching the books tighter. Explain what? That everything you told me was a lie? That the man I trusted doesn't even exist? Her voice broke at the end, and she bit her lip to hold back tears. Adrian's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. He moved closer still, but his hands hung helplessly at his sides. I never meant to deceive you. Evelina, I needed someone who could see me. Not my money, not the headlines, not the billionaire everyone else pretends to admire. Just me, with you. For the first time, I felt real. Evelina finally looked at him then, her blue eyes shining behind fog lenses. Pain and disbelief wore to her gaze. You talk about being real, Adrian, but everything between us was built on a mask. Do you know how humiliating it feels to think you're building something true, only to find out it was all make-believe? Her voice cracked, trembling with the weight of betrayal. Adrian's own eyes glistened as he took another step forward. I know I broke your trust. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was terrified, Evelina. Terrified that if you knew who I was, you'd see me the way everyone else does, that you'd walk away before I even had the chance to show you my heart. He paused, his voice breaking. And you're my reality, Evelina. You're the only thing in my life that feels real. Please don't walk away. Silence filled the library, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Evelina stared at him, her book still pressed against her chest like a shield. She wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to hold on to the man who had made her laugh, who had listened to her as though every word mattered. But the wound was raw. Trust, once broken, wasn't so easily mended. Her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't trust me with the truth, Adrian. And love without trust isn't love at all. Tears streamed down her cheeks, blurring her vision, but she didn't look away. And in that moment, Adrian's mask fell completely. He wasn't the billionaire. He wasn't the confident charmer. He was just a man, soaked, desperate, and utterly broken in front of the only woman who had ever made him feel human. The storm outside began to ease, the rain softening against the windows. But inside, the air between them was heavy with everything unspoken. Evelina's heart warred with her wounded pride. His confession lay before her like shattered glass, dangerous to touch, yet impossible to ignore. For a long, aching moment, they stood there, two souls caught between love and betrayal, between truth and forgiveness. As Evelina lowered the books in her arms ever so slightly, the first fragile question of forgiveness hung in the air, trembling like the fading storm. The days that followed their confrontation were not easy. Evelina kept her distance, her heart torn between the love she still felt and the betrayal she couldn't forget. She went through her routines at the library, reshelving books, guiding patrons, but every quiet moment was filled with memories of Adrian. His smile, his laughter, the way he listened as if every word she spoke mattered. And yet, she also saw the magazine cover. She remembered the lies. Adrian didn't give up. He sent messages, not grand declarations, not promises wrapped in charm, but simple words, honest ones. I'm sorry. I should have told you. You deserve the truth. Evelina read them, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with anger in her chest, but she never answered, not at first. What finally broke through wasn't wealth or flowers or expensive gestures. It was the sight of him waiting outside the library one evening, holding nothing but a single book in his hands. It was her favorite novel, War of the Edges, the kind of copy only a reader who truly cared would choose. Inside, he had tucked a note, not typed, not rehearsed, just his handwriting, unsteady, raw. I don't want to buy your forgiveness. I only want to earn it. Something shifted in Evelina then. Their next meeting was quiet, cautious. They sat on a park bench, the world around them muted by falling leaves. Adrian didn't try to charm her, didn't hide behind easy smiles. He spoke slowly, truthfully, about the life he had kept hidden, about the weight of money, the loneliness of being wanted for everything except who he really was. And for the first time, Evelina heard the tremor in his voice, the pain he had carried alone. Evelina listened, not with blind trust, not with instant forgiveness, but with the patience that had always been her gift. She told him how deeply he had hurt her, how fragile her trust had been, how hard it would be to build again. Her words were not soft, but they were true. Adrian didn't argue. He didn't excuse himself. He simply nodded, accepting every word and promised to try. Not with riches, but with honesty. And slowly, like the careful turning of a page, they began again. They met not in lavish restaurants, but in quiet corners of the library, reading side by side in silence. Adrian cooked for her in his modest kitchen, fumbling with recipes, laughing when things went wrong. Evelina found notes tucked inside her books, not declarations of wealth, but simple lines, memories of their time together, reminders that he was thinking of her. Little by little, she began to trust those moments again. She saw the way he looked at her, not as a possession, not as someone to impress, but as the one person who saw beyond the walls he had built. She saw his effort, his vulnerability, his willingness to stand without the mask he had worn for so long. For Evelina, rebuilding trust wasn't about forgetting the lie. It was about choosing to see the man who stood before her now, the man willing to be broken, humble, and true. For Adrian, it wasn't about proving his worth through fortune. It was about proving his heart through consistency, through patience, through honesty. Together, they began to discover a love not built on wealth or pretense, but on quiet moments, laughter in the small things, and the courage to forgive. It wasn't perfect. Trust never rebuilds overnight. But as autumn gave way to winter and winter to spring, their bond grew stronger, delicate, but resilient, like a book mended at the spine. The cracks would always remain, but the story could still be beautiful. And for the first time, Evelina believed that perhaps this story, her story with Adrian, was one worth continuing. Autumn had draped the city in shades of gold and crimson when Adrian decided it was time. Months had passed since the storm that nearly tore them apart. Months of quiet evenings, of rebuilding trust word by word, gesture by gesture. Their love no longer glittered with the reckless shine of something new. It was steadier now, grounded, softened by honesty. That evening, Evelina thought it was just another simple outing. Adrian had asked her to meet him at the café where they first sat across from each other. She smiled at the thought as she pushed open the familiar door, the gentle chime above greeting her like an old friend. The café hadn't changed. The same golden pools of light spilling across the tables, the same faint hum of chatter, the same warm scent of roasted coffee beans wrapping around her like a blanket. For a moment, she remembered that first night, how nervous she had been, how shyly she had pushed up her glasses, how she never imagined the man waiting for her carried a secret so heavy. Now, as her eyes found him by the window, she felt none of that old fear. Adrian stood as she approached, his smile tinged with nervousness this time, not charm. His hand lingered at his pocket, as though holding something unseen. They sat, spoke lightly at first, books, work, the quiet things that had become their rhythm. Yet Evelina noticed the way his eyes kept flicking toward her, the way his breath seemed unsteady. Finally, Adrian pushed his chair back and stood. "Evelina," he began, his voice low but sure, "this cafe will always be the place where my life changed. The night I met you, I thought it would be just another evening. But instead, it became the beginning of everything I never knew I was searching for." Her heart raced. She pressed her hands together in her lap, her breath caught between anticipation and disbelief. Adrian sank to one knee. His hands trembled, not with fear of rejection, but with the weight of everything they had endured together. From lies to heartbreak, from storms to reconciliation, all of it had led to this moment. "You were the chapter my story was missing," he said, his green eyes locked on hers, filled with a depth she had never doubted since his truth came to light. "You saw me when I was afraid to be seen. You love me not for what the world calls me, but for who I am when the world is stripped away. Evelina, will you write the rest of our book with me?" Her glasses blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand, her golden hair slipping forward as she bent toward him. In that instant, all the pain, all the doubt, all the cracks in their story seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet, unwavering truth of what they had built together. "Always," she whispered, her voice breaking but certain. The café seemed to pause around them, the world narrowing to just the two of them as Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger. Their kiss was soft, not dramatic, not rushed, just a seal of the promise they had already been living. Outside, leaves swirled in the autumn air, carried by a gentle breeze. Inside, Evelina and Adrian held each other as though they were holding the rest of their lives. It was not the wealth nor the grand gestures that made this moment extraordinary. It was the honesty, the trust, and the love that had been fought for, lost, and rebuilt. And as they sat together, hands entwined, Evelina knew this was her forever story. Not written in the pages of a novel, but lived, real, imperfect, and beautiful. Some stories don't end with fireworks or sweeping orchestras. Some don't end with riches or perfect fairy tale moments. Instead, they end the way life truly moves forward, through quiet choices, small acts of courage, and the willingness to forgive. Evelina and Adrian's love was not born from perfection. It was born from vulnerability, from mistakes, from the courage to take off masks and face the truth, no matter how painful it was. What began as a lie could have ended as nothing more than heartbreak. She could have walked away, choosing the safety of walls built high. He could have let fear keep him silent forever. But instead, they both chose something harder. They chose honesty. They chose to fight for the fragile, trembling trust that love demands. And in doing so, they discovered a truth greater than wealth, more enduring than status. That love, real love, is not about what someone can give you in possessions or power. It's about what they can give you in truth. Evelina learned that even the gentlest heart can find strength when faced with betrayal. That forgiveness is not weakness. It is an act of bravery. Adrian learned that love cannot be bought or performed. It must be lived with openness, with humility, with the willingness to be seen as imperfect. Together, they learned that the strongest love isn't the one without cracks. It's the one that survives them. The one that grows in the spaces where trust is rebuilt. And perhaps that's a lesson for all of us. We live in a world where appearances often matter more than reality, where masks are easier to wear than truth. But masks can only last so long. Eventually, love demands honesty. Because at the end of the day, it isn't the titles or the headlines or the fortunes that will stand beside us in our quietest moments. It's the person who knows our flaws, our fears, our secrets, and chooses to stay anyway. So when you think of Evelina and Adrian, remember this. Love doesn't need to be perfect to be extraordinary. It only needs to be real. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest story any of us can hope to live. Did this story move you? Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. From all of us at Heartfelt Tales TV, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories straight from the heart.